Hello and welcome to the Blood and Pigment channel. I'm Joseph.
I'm Guy.
And I'm Dan.
Today we're just going to have a loose conversation talking about collecting and using terrain in Blood and Plunder. Every gamer has their own approach to collecting and using terrain, but I think can be a fun and rich and rewarding part of the hobby. And I thought we'd talk about the scenarios, the necessary pieces, the helpful pieces, and where to find some of those things, and our own individual approaches.
But before we talk about all the different types of terrain that are out there, we need to ask, why terrain? I look at how you make the battlefield look, how you make the area that you have a Blood and Plunder game look. It's an integral part of playing this game and really adds to the enjoyment, especially when you look over and you see your line of trees or crops in a field or the shattered wreckage of a previous ship that you sank along the coastline of New France. It really adds a lot of drama to the game and it makes it a lot more enjoyable.
Yeah, I think I might not acknowledge this enough, but I think the visual is a big part of why I enjoy this game so much. So having good, authentic terrain that looks good on the table is a big part of what makes this game fun to me.
Yeah, it's all about the aesthetic.
Sometimes. Also, I found sometimes that laying out the terrain actually is going to dictate the course of your game. You can definitely set up terrain in a way that is advantageous to yourself, and that's where I think rules for Blood and Plunder are good, where players alternate putting pieces of terrain out to hopefully make it fair. Sometimes I just set up a board the way that looks cool, which is my natural instinct, and then I realize, oh wow, I just gave myself a huge advantage, or oh wow, I'm screwed because I made it look pretty.
Yeah, I
Well,
usually
we'll
do
get
a mirror. I'll usually do a mirror. If I have it terrain on one side, I'll try to flip it and mirror the other side, so at least it kind of evens that out. But when we start getting fortifications, that's when it's like, all right, let's set it up, see what looks cool, then we'll just go from there.
Yeah, I think just getting kind of a bunch of pieces together, then taking turns putting stuff out after you know your scenario is a good, fair way to do it. Boards don't always look as pretty and symmetrical or natural or authentic as I like, but makes it more fair.
Well, you hit on something there, Dan. What does the Book of Wargaming say about terrain, though?
Here, let me just pull it on out, put on my readers. In regards to thine's most glorious terrain, thou shalt refer to verse 1. Picketh that which looketh the coolest to thine own personal tastes. However, when thine sets up the board, do not give thyself an unneeded advantage, otherwise the other player may throw their drink in your face. That's verse 2.
That really gets to the heart of the matter quickly.
It does. When you first start playing a game, any tabletop miniatures game, usually after buying a couple of your first miniatures, you're going to start looking for terrain to have around them because it's not really any fun to just play on a blank table. And saying, hey, this book is a hill only gets you to so far.
A little harder to be immersed when you're playing with books and toilet paper tubes, etc. But if you're on a budget and you're just getting started, there's no shame in that, and it can be helpful and a good place to start. Better than playing on a flat surface, but I find it very satisfying to have a nice looking board.
I mean, that's what got me into wargaming. Is I went into it might have been a GW, a Games Workshop in a mall, like probably 10 or 15 years ago, if that. And I just walked in, and the guy had a little starter battles from whatever the latest, $8 billion starters that was. And I saw the little minis, and saw the train. I was like, whoa, what is this? It's a game. And then my little mind went, what? It's a game? And then that's where it went from there. So it's also good at drawing people in. And, the most important rule is as long as it looks cool and you're not giving yourself an unfair advantage, you're good to go. I mean, it looks good. That's the point. That's why we spend so much time painting the ships. Some people are people who like to paint minis. Some people like to paint ships. Some people really love making terrain. There's entire YouTube channels out there, people making terrain.
Yeah, that's really fun. Some people can just whip it out and they just get these techniques where they can make something look really natural with just the right material. Not even expensive. They just find household items or material. It's you can watch a lot of fun YouTube videos.
Yeah, whether it be
But it's
for,
never as easy as
Blood
they
and
make it look.
Yeah, whether it's for Blood and Plunder, or your local TTRPG night, whatever it is, I've seen lots of people make terrain, and we actually learned a lot about making terrain just watching people. And my brother makes it for our D&D sessions, and it looks great. It's one thing to have a bunch of minis again on a flat board and go, all right, I'm going to swing at that soda can, which is supposed to be an enemy. It's another thing when it's time to fight the final boss of the campaign, and he pulls out a giant model and pops it on the table, and then goes and puts hazardous materials on the board to make terrain. It looks great.
That hits to I think one of the best things about terrain is we mentioned using a book as a hill, or I mentioned using a book as a hill, or you mentioned a toilet paper roll as something else. I think you need to be brave when doing terrain, and the cheapest, most fun you're going to have with terrain is if you figure out how to do it yourself, because it's you going to look exactly what you want it to look, and there's a
Not
lot
always
of
true, but
resources out there. Well, it's going to look how it turns out.
my native
Really speaking.
Palisade in my shoebox under my coffee table begs to differ. But
I think the idea is to be brave about making your own terrain.
yeah, although
You're
there's a lot different kinds of gamers. Some gamers want to
yeah.
game, some want to paint, and some want to do this hobby stuff, and that's okay. So depends on where you want to spend your time, where you get satisfaction. But
I mean, my brother made a tower where he got a piece of foam board, like the insulation foam, and he cut out every single individual brick, put it inside a bigger container with a rolled up ball of tinfoil, shook it to age it, and then he just glued these bricks painstakingly on the outside of like a Whataburger cup, and then we had a tower. And it looks
Yeah.
great. You'd think it was
Yeah.
professionally made, and it's so impressive.
yeah, well, if you want to look at some awesome terrain techniques, Dexter from the Blood and Plunder Facebook group and from the Plunder Den has some incredible and well-made videos doing a bunch of different terrain features.
He's a Swiss Army knife of a hobbyist. Every time I think that, oh, that's the coolest thing ever, the following week, it's the new coolest thing ever. He just keeps pulling stuff out of nowhere. I'm like, oh my God, I never would have thought of that.
Out of fast food cups and popsicle sticks and foam. I know, it's crazy. He puts work in on those. That takes time though. But
Watching him work is like watching those survival shows where it's like, oh, my name is your name, whatever his name is here. I got to survive for 8 days, and I got a toothpick and a box of matches. That's like the way it's like watching him work. You'll be this random material, and boom, you got terrain.
So, dear listener, if you have not looked at his channel, look up the Plunder Den and subscribe and watch some of his work. It takes time to build good terrain, but you can do it on the cheap. Although, it seems like whenever I try to make terrain, I buy a bunch of stuff, try to make it, and then I throw it away and buy the terrain after all. So sometimes it's not cheaper, and if you don't have the skill or the heart, like
I've had a lot of success making my own terrain. Some of it I use quite frequently. Other pieces of it are kind of just stashed in my garage. Where there if I need them, but you don't really use as much nowadays.
Other big part of important thing in terrain is it makes your games actually interesting. If you're playing on a flat field, you ignore a lot of the special rules that make the game interesting. You just shoot at each other and see who gets the most hits. But if you have terrain features to move in and through and around, and to capture and to hide behind, your game becomes a lot more interesting. Sounds obvious, but if you have just a big 3x4 mat with two things on it, it limits your options. You have less interesting choices to make, which those choices are what makes a game fun. So pretty essential to have some terrain at least.
And there are pieces of terrain that you need to have to play certain scenarios in this game. We happen to have compiled a small list along with a amount of things that you would need. Starting with Raise and Plunder, both need, for land battles, they both need a house of some sort. Raise needs 2 houses because it's
Plunder
a
does as well, right?
Plunder
Sorry.
does as well. Yeah. So that's 2 scenarios right there from No Peace Beyond the Line, or that require you to have 2 structures. Houses are the easiest type of structures to represent for this one because you don't really want to use a fortification at all because it will make the scenario objectives a little
Even
bit
harder.
too hard. Like, could you imagine playing Raise with 2 stone tower forts?
You can still burn it. Still a
Yeah,
10, right?
yeah, it's still a 10. So you need to have, if you're going to play those scenarios out of No Peace Beyond the Line, and I would highly suggest it. They're both really fun. You need to have at least 2 houses or structures. For the longest time, I used a gallows kit that a MDF kit that I had as one of my structures until I painted up one of the firelock houses. But you can use it, so you can use any type of structures you want for that. But for those scenarios, you do need 2 of them.
Then some of the scenarios in Fire on the Frontier, which just came out, the historical scenarios all call for some sort of specific terrain. Being historical, they're more detailed than some of the generic scenarios in core rulebook, and some of the Total War scenario also focuses on houses being kind of a raid on a village or settlement.
Yeah.
So houses are pretty easy or smart choice to pick up for some early terrain pieces.
Buccaneer's Companion 1 also has several different fortification requirements in that are a form of terrain. And you would need a palisade, you need a stone tower fort, you need a bunch of buildings for the first scenario because you're supposed to be in a town. So if you're going to play through that, you need to have at least, things that can represent those pieces of terrain. Dan, do you want to hit? Are there any scenarios that require sea scenarios that require any terrain?
I think that we just hit. I believe Plunder is one of them. The sea version of Plunder requires, a ship, and even if it doesn't require it, you can always throw terrain down and make sea games a lot more dynamic instead of just open sea. If you throw down islands, rocks, stuff like that, it makes it so
Shoals.
it's not just sail. Well, you bring the shoals anyway. I don't have to bring shoals. You'll just magnetize yourself to them.
That's true.
We know that. But it's the best sea games I've ever played is where we had 2 small ships and threw down a ton of terrain, so it became more important about maneuvering than, shooting at each other.
Yeah, that can make a game a lot more interesting.
And if you have an island on the board too in a sea game, it always adds the strategical opportunity to jump off of your ship onto the island and run across to surprise or get away from your foe.
And even in like objective games, which is an objective marker, you can use terrain for that. Be it barrels we did the last 2 games we did an ongoing campaign for us is we played the scenario where you have to put down I think it's like 8 terrain markers, and we just put down 8 barrels and put the markers under it. So we took the barrel off, flipped it, that barrel's empty, and the final barrel that everyone was looking for was the one with the moonshine in it.
Nice.
And I've had people steal 2 of my commander's moonshines twice. So he kept those barrels and feels very proud of himself. But even little things like that, it doesn't have to be, a giant stone tower or, a patch of trees. Even just something cool it could be a treasure chest from an objective marker. That's terrain. That looks cool. That's a lot better than just, flipping over a penny.
Yeah, speaking to that point, should we talk through a list of some kind of basic categories of terrain that are helpful? Those scenarios that we listed, most of them require a couple buildings, and that's easy to work around, but there's a lot of other terrain pieces that can be helpful or enjoyable.
I think the most enjoyable piece of terrain that I own is lots of trees. There is something about plunking down a dozen or more trees on a board that really makes it feel like you're going to do a game. And it adds to a lot of the flavor of what you're experiencing. Now, I've been accused my trees are out of scale because I still bring out my Dollar Tree trees from their Christmas from a Christmas long ago that I bought.
I'm jealous of those. I want them.
But and they are out of scale, but I like the look of them.
Well, you talk about scale. Scale has to be compromised for wargaming because trees are regularly over 100 feet tall. If you match that up to a miniature who's 6 feet tall at 1 inch, that's going to be like 16, 17 inches tall. Nobody
Yep.
really puts realistic terrain down, and that's okay. If you did, it'd be very, very difficult to play. I've fallen into that trap trying to make a diorama terrain piece where I can't even get my miniatures in and out of it anymore. So, compromising on the scale is necessary. So,
Okay.
it's gonna.
Especially we live Joseph and I live in Oregon and we have forests around. And let me tell you, if I ever put terrain on a board that had as many trees as there are in a sparsely a sparse forest in this area, I would have to put more than 100 trees on that board.
Yeah.
Like how they grow close to each other to provide even a sparse canopy is way more trees than I want to put on the board. Not more than I want to own. I want to own all the trees. Let me get that out. But
it's there to be representative, not to be literal.
yes, yeah.
Yeah, but trees are, I think, like the number two thing. Maybe the number one thing. Houses, you need them. They're necessary for some scenarios, but trees are interesting. They provide cover. You can move through them. They provide difficult terrain. They can block line of sight if you put a bunch together. They're very flexible. And
Like
they make your
how units
place look good.
access their cover score or
Mhm.
their range save is through trees usually because you'll say, "Hey, I'm in a bush," or "I'm in this copse of trees here." I get my cover save.
Other thing that makes a board look fun, especially more like an urban setting or a um, dock or something, is just little scattered terrain stuff like barrels and crates and wagons and things like that. It kind of brings the table alive, especially village kind of area. Wheelbarrow, and those are kind of hard to buy all in one place, but it's fun to just pick those up, find little bits that'll work here and there, and have options for making your table unique. And those can provide cover and difficult terrain as well.
Let me tell you, Dan, when you mentioned those barrels that we're using as the markers for the search and recover, like I had a flashback. It took me a year and a half to find a supply of barrels that I liked. Like that's partially my own fault. I didn't want to look online for them. I wanted to find a store that has them, and oh, it was important to have barrels, have boxes, crates, other stuff that you can like use, and to provide like little object terrain for them. So people, like you said, Joseph, that people can people units can hide behind them and get it just adds more life to it. You can also pile the barrels or crates in a ship to make it look more lived into, like it's a merchant ship. Even if you're
Yeah, I
just
put a bunch
doing
of
a
crates and
game.
barrels on my flute to make it more merchanty. I thought it was cool.
Yeah, yeah. And it's fun too to do that to represent when you're using grape shot. If you have a bunch of barrels near your cannons on a ship, that hey, this is makes it different. This is all the shot that they're holding in these barrels.
We play a lot with elevated features because my store that I play at has a lot of terrain, and they have these elevated like stone features that got palm trees on top. and we'll usually put those in the middle. So instead of just having a straight shoot across, people got to again maneuver around the terrain, and it adds a lot of features. If you're up, what is it, 2 inches? 2 inches is the rule, where you're over 2 inches and you're denying them cover essentially. Like, elevation matters, especially we never had to use climbing until recently. Well, when I wanted to climb a cliff instead of go around, and it adds a lot of that's out of dimension, and again, it looks cool.
I find this one of the harder things to accomplish, but elevation and the features of a landscape are really important tactically in almost every battle, land battle, that you study. But it's hard to make happen on a board because you roll your mat out and that's it. It's hard to actually make a hill. I've tried to buy some hills off of eBay and never been really happy with them because you can't stand your models up on them. Might have a little flat spot on the top, but all the sides you can't really use. So I'm a little frustrated with that. But the cliff kind of thing is better. You can just get a big piece of insulation foam and carve the edges out to look like stone face or something,
and have it go up in steps. Yeah.
Yeah.
The best way to represent a elevate or use elevation is a rocky cliff like that. Again, it doesn't look really real because there's not any place in that looks like a step pyramid almost.
Yeah.
But it does make it easier to use miniatures on it. I've had some luck with rocky terrain that you can get from some other companies where it's because it's rocky. It has more places you can put models going up to the top of something, rather than the grassy hills that I have. If any model is either standing anywhere but the very top of it, you have to lie them down to represent that they're where they are, just
Right.
because there's not any way to stand them up there.
I would love to see someone play a game with a step period. That sounds awesome. Step period, excuse me, step pyramid.
There were step pyramids in South America, so
Yeah.
or there are.
That'd be so cool. I'd be down for that. Little jungle terrain. Defenders are defending a step pyramid, and the attackers are coming out of the jungle. That is just so many scenarios you can do. You can even create your own scenarios with terrain. I think we were talking about this. I once used a galleon as terrain. We parked it on the beach. We had a galleon and a stone tower fort. It was a 2v2 fight. We had the attackers coming from land and sea, and the defenders, half of them were on the galleon, and the other half were in the stone tower fort. I made them pay for the galleon. I think I asked somebody, I can't remember who, it was a long time ago, to figure out a point value for a beached, basically an anchored galleon, made them pay for it like you would, a fortification. And it was a really fun game. It looked cool. It was really cool to see them use the swivels to defend their ship and then have to defend from the sloop boarding said galleon. It was a lot of fun. And just little things like that just can make a game so much more fun.
Yeah, a lot of creativity available around that.
Yeah, using ships that you have to make a port in an amphibious scenario is also a lot of fun. You have oftentimes the ships anyways, and then having little piers that you can put next to them, and then filling in all the ships, and then having barrels on the ships to represent it's a port town, and these are ships that were either fishing vessels or cargo vessels that are partially loaded or partially unloaded. It really just makes the whole scenario come alive, where you're not just pushing your guys around because you want to claim a point. You're attacking a sea town.
Makes a big difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
And that leads to another obvious piece that's helpful for amphibious games, and that's docks, which you can make pretty handily. You've made a couple wooden docks, right?
Yes, I have. I've made 20 wooden piers.
Oh my goodness.
It was a lot of fun, and once I figured it out, I just did a assembly line for them, and because partially I wanted to do a amphibious game where the whole whole land side is just a network of piers, because
Oh yeah, we played that once.
yeah, most of the larger places I've lived, that had a pier system. The pier system with the ships, even like a small with a small town, the pier system is just so immense. I mean, with so many different docks for different ships and different size ships there, and different what are they called, spillways for different ships. So to just have like one or two piers along along the beachhead, it just never felt right. So I wanted to try doing a whole map of them. Takes a lot to set up though.
Yeah. The other sea terrain that I have to obligated to mention is Shoal Terrain, which I seem like I'm always finding unexpectedly. And this is kind of weird because it's difficult to find a way to buy this. So you kind of have to make it yourself, which is not. I think it's
easy
kind
to
of easy,
make.
but it's a kind of a weird
Yeah.
process. But I guess Fat Matt does make a set specifically for Blood and Plunder, I think, that has some shoals in it. 2
Yeah.
shoals maybe. So you can get that.
And
But
they have that. They have that in there. If you want to use a No Peace Beyond the Line C event table, they have that 4x12 shoal in there that you need for that event table. So
don't remind me.
that's the one that this is actually the terrain that I made myself that I use almost every time I play a C game. I use the shoals I painted up. And all it is it's that clear, thin acrylic rolled sheet plastic, and then blue paint in swirlies. I did light blue. I think the less paint you use, the better. Just in little, I used a sponge brush, to go in just circles, and then it rolled up for a while, but after about a year of putting something on it to keep it flat, they don't roll up anymore. So there's that.
You can lightly iron over that or get it warm too to flatten it out. But yeah, sea games, it's easy to forget about terrain, but shoals actually make the game quite a bit more interesting. Or islands as well, but islands tend to goof things up a little more.
Islands have that 3-inch depth radius where you automatically run aground whenever you
Takes
get
up a
near
lot of the board. Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't know you've run aground until your opponent goes like, "Aren't you really close to that island?"
Ah!
Then you say, "I don't want to run aground. Can I take that back?" And then, oh, it's so bad. Shells don't do that. Shells, like you said, they just make it more interesting. Make you have to use that stat
Draft value.
the draft
And it
value.
gives you another interesting decision to make. Are you going to take the risk? Do you have the ship appropriate for it? Are you going to just crash over it with your galley and see what happens? You have a choice unless you draw the event, and then you just do it. Yeah.
I did a learn to play scenario where with barks against 2 barks fighting each other, and I was like, yeah, here's the shoals, we're gonna do this just because it makes the board look interesting. But the barks have shallow drafts, so you only run into them like 1 in 100 chance, so it's not gonna happen. And let me tell you, I had a player that got stuck on one because it was late game. He wanted to go straight over it. He was like, I know the risks. I'm going to try it. And he rolled 2 10s. And then he got to learn in his very first game how to drop your sail settings to 0 and do a repair action to push off of the shoal.
Oops.
Yep.
So what do you say we look at some good sources we found for terrain, and then maybe describe our own collection or individual approach to collecting before we wrap up here?
Yeah, Dan, where do you get your terrain from?
So I am kind of blessed in that I don't have to hold a lot of terrain because the store that I play at, if you're in the DFW area in Texas, Evolution Games, you should totally come by. Shameless plug there. They have a ton of terrain that are just available to us. And because they play a lot of games, they're mainly a bolt action in like 40K store, but they have lots of terrain for us to use, and it's fantastic.
You are truly blessed.
Well, that's why I started playing at the store. We have the largest historical wargaming following in this part of Texas, so that's why we play, and that's how I got people in. But it's even the stuff that's for bolt action, some of the rubbled houses. If you squint, it kind of looks like just a knocked over stone structure, and it works, and it looks great. I usually aim to get there about a half hour early, just so I can set up boards.
That is, I think, consequence of using terrain. I can spend an hour setting up a board sometimes. It's embarrassing.
On average, for me, it's about half an hour. Half an hour to get the terrain out on the board and to get your force assembled. But it can't take longer. I also have taken an hour just setting up a needlessly complicated board.
But that can be fun. Where do you get your terrain?
I have made a lot of it, but I also I like buying pre-painted terrain from various sources, and then or buying terrain that I have to lightly assemble and paint. That's really some of the my favorite terrain is stuff that just came pre-painted, and I just assembled it and then use it every time I game.
Like foreground stuff, or what are you referring to?
Well, yeah, some of the foreground. They have some great terrain pieces. They filled the hole kind of in what my collection was. I had a lot of natural trees. I had a lot of natural stuff, but I was missing a lot of buildings. So I got a lot of the foreground buildings and firelock buildings just to make a town a little bit. And then the other ones that are pre-painted that I got was the Gale Force 9 Battlefield box. Like I was saying, I like buying local if I can, and the local stores in the area, Geeks and Games and Guardian Games, both have a lot of Gale Force 9 terrain at them. So every time when I was in the market for more terrain, it was easy to come by, and I think it looks great.
Yeah, they have really good forest, both deciduous and evergreen. We have those mats that are basically a footprint for the forest, a abnormally shaped oval kind of thing where you can put grass on it, which is really nice for gameplay because that can define your forest space without having to worry about placing the trees just right. That's a great product.
Yeah, I do love that shadow. I think even if you're playing with making your own trees, making cutting out like a velvet, like a velvet at the cheapest, like a little shape to where your trees are, it just makes this game a lot easier to play because there's not a question of what units are in cover and which ones aren't.
Yep.
You can the cheap way to do it, or the other way to do it, is when you assemble all your trees, the connection that you have imaginary lines between the trees, and then that counts as cover. So if you
Like a
have three
circle, basically.
trees, yeah, like a circle, or you have three trees in a triangle, any area that's inside of that triangle is in cover. But it makes it hard to go to like just grok at a distance. Like, is that person in cover? Are they not? Like, what if there are 10 trees there? What's in cover and what isn't? What if the tree gets nudged because I want to stand where the tree is? Is it hard cover, or am I unable to be seen if I'm directly behind a tree? Like,
Yeah, laying out those rules before the game starts is prudent, especially if it's playing with a player you haven't played with before.
yeah, it's you. Well, before I always recommend, if you're going to play Blood and Plunder, having on a land game, have the terrain talk before it of what's hard cover, what's soft cover, what terrain does what's object cover, what's area cover.
Speaking of hardcover, something we didn't mention, a piece of terrain is fences. You can have stone fences or wooden fences. Those look good on the board and are easy to move over, but provide cover. That's a good piece to collect.
Or hardcover too. hardcover is really important in a lot of land games because it becomes a easily defensible spot, but you never want it to be hard area cover, because hard area cover means that they can be attacked from any side, and they're always going to have a good save. So they become like a stuck tank almost.
It's like a blockhouse.
Yeah, it's like it's a blockhouse, but it's not a. it's
I think
free.
we did that once with a stone feature that I bought. That turned out very advantageous to me with my natives in the rocky
It did.
pit there.
But a stone fence, you can go around, and then
flank it.
and then all of a sudden they don't have cover, so they go from having hard cover with a -1 to no cover and saving on 9s. So I like stone fences a lot, and I use them or put them as a feature in a lot of games. And also since they're not area cover, they allow models that have elusive not to they don't get the benefit of elusive and hardcover, which that can be a pain.
Yeah.
Is having hardcover that's also elusive means that like a unit that would usually save on 6 is all of a sudden saving on 4s.
That's hard to root out.
Yeah.
Well, I'm addicted to terrain. I have collected quite a bit of it, which is fun, but I find some of it I don't ever get around to using because I got something better. But some of my favorite pieces have come from Foreground. They do a lot of fun structures, and they have generously sent some to me for free, which has been nice. Now, they're pretty reasonably priced, though, although they do ship from England, so the shipping can be a little bit punishing. But I highly recommend their stuff. Some of it is very complex to put together, some of the older stuff, but anything newer is usually quite simple and utilitarian, plus it looks good. They have that whole series of what's the series they made for Blood and Plunder? Ports of Plunder. All the stucco-y looking houses and docks and that crane. The Firelock carries all that stuff. Quite affordable for what you're getting. The silly stucco powder is acquired taste. It's difficult to work with to start with, but if you get the process down, it's pretty cheap terrain. It looks great, and it's very functional too.
It looks really unique too with the stucco powder, and you don't have to put it on. If you want to not put on the stucco powder, you can kind of get the same effect by using some thicker white paint and a sponge brush to just don't if when you're going to apply the paint, you don't want to brush with it. You want to press the sponge to it and then pull it back. And as long as it's a thicker paint, like I did it with gesso, as long as it's a thicker paint, it will maintain that texture when you do that. And if you get most of the paint out of the brush, you can also have some areas where it's where the undercoat of the wall shows through, so it will look like that area is worn thin. It's a little bit of work compared to the powder, and that's saying a lot because the powder is messy work.
Yeah.
But that's just because you also have to like set aside the pieces that you're going to paint beforehand. But you have to do that anyways with the powder.
The Foreground stuff is all MDF, just to be clear. It's MDF stuff, but they're very creative with that. They can do some impressive things. And I think they're probably the best MDF outfit out there. Really good product. And a wide variety of stuff from North American log cabins to big Spanish churches to docks and gallows and Dutch buildings you could use for New York if you wanted. A lot of fun stuff. And a lot of good scatter terrain, like barrels. They have barrels. They have crates. Oh, the crates are a pain to put together. So tiny, but they look good. Carts and wagons, and you can spend a lot of time and money on their website. Fun stuff.
Another good source is Firelock Games themselves. They have a limited quantity, but a quantity of terrain pieces that are available. It starts with the houses that I really like, and They also had farmed fields,
I like
and
those farm fields. They're nice and affordable too.
yeah, farm fields are a little bit of a fun game thing too, because it's terrain. It's a special type of terrain where it's rough terrain, but it doesn't give cover because it's just plowed earth.
Right. So you have to
Unless
go
you
slow.
unless yeah, you got to go slow, but you don't get to use your cover save with it. So it's something that there's not a lot of other ways to depict that type of terrain either. I'm checking the website right now to see what they have in stock. So they have their thatched house, which I like. It's it's a little bit hard to paint with the straw on the top because you
It's
really
really
have to.
textured, yeah.
Yeah.
Cram your paint in there.
Oh yeah, you got to go over it a lot to make sure you get everywhere. But it also takes a wash really well and dry brushes really well. So a wash and a dry brush on that straw will really help it pop and kind of look like the straw it's supposed to be. The other items that they have are the square house and the tiled house. Those were the first batch was the village bundle that was the thatched house, tiled house, and square house, and the farm field. Both the square house and the tiled house really feel close to each other in size and dimensions. There's just a little bit like what's the size difference that you would say? I think like
I think it's like a 4x4 versus a 3x4, 2.5x4.
yeah, it's just like one,
Rectangle square, yeah.
yeah, like 4 square inches of less area. But they each have a door and 3 windows. Kind of easy to paint as a painting project. The square house does have stucco that broke off to expose brick underneath it,
That's
which
cool.
is it's a fun paint. You can get out your bright reds if you want, or go for the more pinkish tones. Yeah, and they also have the terracotta roofs that you can have fun with too. I was when I was painting mine up, I looked at the history of terracotta in America
Oh, right.
and like what colors they had, and yeah, just to see what color I could paint it, and it's kind of paint it whatever color you want, like as long as it's not whatever earth tone you want, because they were making terracotta in America for 1,000 years. And then the other one that I don't have yet is the well, actually, looking at their site, they have their painted buildings. What's our opinion on their painted buildings?
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't write that down. It's what is it called? Miniature Building Authority or something?
Yes.
I have a couple of those. They're ready to go out of the box. They're a Chinese product. I find their paint jobs aren't as nice as the pictures are. The small buildings painted are $100, and the big buildings are 200, 250.
Yep.
I just got the Spanish governor's mansion, which is pretty cool, but the paint job is really sloppy. I would not recommend blowing $250 on it unless you have $250 you really don't like, or you really just like the look and shape of it. It's pretty sloppy work, though, for that price point. And like some of the pieces, like there's a floor, so you can put miniatures in the first floor or the second floor with steps of it, and the hole in the floor doesn't match up to the steps no matter
Oh
what you
no.
do. It was just cut wrong. So I'm not sure how much of authority they are on it. But I hate to say something bad about it, but they're convenient, but they aren't that high of quality, in my opinion.
So another source for terrain is STLs. If you go on any, I know Thingiverse is a big one, or if you just buy STLs off of Etsy and 3D print your own terrain, with how quote unquote affordable 3D printers are getting. If you got an extra, I've seen them go for 2, 3, usually about $300 to $400 right now for a good one. you can print your own terrain, and people go nuts about it. I've seen people print treasure chests, kraken tentacles, if you're into that sort of thing. Little boats that are splintered, all kinds of stuff, and you can print it. Then you technically are only spending money on resin and not going anywhere, and you can make terrain from the comfort of your own home.
Yeah, and there are even outfits that will, if you don't have a printer, you can send them your STL files and they will print it at you for a premium as well. So it's a good
And
source.
this probably is going to be the way increasingly popular going forward as that technology gets cheaper. That might be something we see more and more of.
Yeah, did you know that Joann's has 3D printers?
Really?
Yeah,
You can buy or that you can
you
utilize?
do buy behind the
Okay.
counter. They had
Hmm.
a whole line of 3D
Hmm.
printers. I got a kick of that last time I went in there to buy buy some supplies.
Really?
A new source I've recently found is, I'm not sure how to say it actually. Akison Creations. It's a wargaming terrain site that has plastic poured resin stuff. He's done a lot of historical research, and the biggest cool thing here is he has a pretty wide range of North American frontier stuff, including native stuff. He has longhouses and wigwams and
Oh, nice.
palisades and scattered terrain and blockhouses and cabins, ruined, burnt cabins, and it's all quite affordable right now compared to Miniature Authority or whatever. But you can get a little cabin for $12 or $15 or something, and it's a nice little piece, or a blockhouse for $20, 20, 25. And it's
Yeah.
pretty good quality, and it paints up real nice. I bought a bunch of Indian stuff. It's one of the only sources that I've found that are for quality longhouses and wigwams.
Oh, that's nice. I'll have to check him out.
We already mentioned Gale Force 9. That's a popular and readily available product. It has forests. And then the other thing I really like of theirs is the stone outcropping kind of thing. There's a large
Oh
one
yeah,
and a medium
yeah.
sized one. That gives you a little elevation and a little bit of a feature to block line of sight. And that's ready to go out of the box.
I like their stone roads too. Their some of the other terrain that we mentioned, like the woodlands, the dunes. I also like their palm tree sets. Their palm trees are, again, they're not as big as palm trees would be, but they're the palm trees that everybody that plays this game uses. So why not?
Another outfit I've recently discovered and been super happy with is Hrc Scenery from Etsy, which there's a bunch of stuff on Etsy you can find, but this outfit's out of Poland and they hand make terrain. Or trees are the best and the cheapest for the best I have found so far. About $20 for a stand of 5 trees on a little pad thing, but really well done. Each one is unique, so they aren't cookie cutter. The trees have 2 tones of green on them to make them look more natural. I did a whole review on the blog you can check out for them. Really highly recommended them, and they have a pretty good range of stuff, including fences and fields and trees and rocks. And I spent a lot of money on them. Again, the shipping is a bit expensive from Poland, but the product is cheap for what it is, and it's very high quality.
And if you're inclined, you can also go to Etsy to look for terrain that's made on there. I do not do it myself, but I've seen a lot of good things come from Etsy. It's usually hit and miss. You have to research what that person has come out with, but you're also paying most of the time small scale crafters to do something. Is Etsy still like that?
Yeah.
Yes, it actually is. I actually get a lot of my Commander minis. I got a D&D mini that I couldn't find, like stuff that I can't find mainstream. I can usually find on Etsy. My commander for the campaign, I actually ordered off of Etsy, and he printed it and sent it over. So, like, if the sky's the limit with Etsy, and I frequent Etsy a lot. I usually use it for my gift giving and everything like that. Not to get too off topic, but it's usually small sale folks who are doing stuff, and that's kind of what I'm all about. And I've seen some pretty impressive 3D printed stuff, from terrain to minis to vehicles and even buildings. It's insane. I love it.
The small scale also lets you do custom stuff. This HRC place, every time I order, they message me as soon as they're about to work on my order, saying, anything you want custom? Do you want snow? Do you want North American? What kind of foliage do you want? And that's awesome. Having a more personal relationship with a creator like that is pretty cool.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And there's always eBay. You can always find some of it's not very good, but you can find a lot on eBay. It's not as personal as Etsy, but I bought quite a bit of terrain off eBay. Some of it I didn't like and never use again, but
If you have patience, eBay is always an option.
Strangely, too, it's also harder to find some more unique things on eBay versus anywhere else. Like, I was looking for buying a blockhouse, and there is one type of blockhouse on eBay right now under the name Blockhouse Miniature, and it was the Foreground blockhouse,
yeah.
and that was the only blockhouse you can buy. Here it is. I couldn't believe it.
The Foreground blockhouse is the first piece of terrain I ever bought for Blood and Plunder. It's on the table on my first game of Blood and Plunder, so a special spot.
Well, according to eBay, it's the only blockhouse that exists, period. So,
I know.
you know, or the first, the only type of historical blockhouse. There's lots of blockhouses for World War II and fantasy stuff. Yeah. So eBay is hard to. You have to kind of use like your skills in what would this person call this thing if they were trying to sell it on eBay.
Your Google
Because-
skills, yeah.
Yeah. You have to use that, but eBay can have a lot of success in some ways too, and you can get some good deals there as well.
One other source that just comes to mind, one of my first purchases was through a company called Empires at War. I now consider them a poor man's Foreground. They aren't that much cheaper, and they aren't quite as nice, but they do glue together a little faster. But they have a whole Spanish city set of stucco-y looking buildings with the tile roofs.
Yeah.
And some other stuff like that. But we probably talked long enough. Anything else we should mention before we wrap it up here?
No, I think we have covered everything.
I'm sure there's more to cover, but we should be done.
No, we've covered everything.
The definitive summary, the definitive conversation on terrain. I need to update the links section of the blog, Blood and Pigment, so I will add some of these creators to that page. There's a tab on Blood and Pigment that's for links. It's pretty outdated, but some of these are definitely worth making more visible. Good products, and will make your games of Blood and Plunder more enjoyable. For more Blood and Plunder articles on terrain and everything else Blood and Plunder, you can go over to bloodandpigment.com and check out what we have there.
The rest of our YouTube channel as well. We'll be aiming to put out a video every Monday. Subscribe and ring the ship's bell so you can stay notified of our uploads.
As always, keep your dice ready, the wind at your back, yarhar.